Hello again, this is Victor James, author of that new book in the Megacosm called The Miracleman that's available wherever books are sold, so get your copy now. But I wanted to talk about one of my favorite comic book runs, and that's Alan Moore's Miracleman. Alan Moore seems to be rather contentious in comic book circles. Many see him as a brilliant writer who penned such classics as Swamp Thing, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, V for Vendetta, and his seminal work Watchmen. But I found that these works also bring criticism, as some feel Alan Moore is overrated and began the long downfall of the comic book industry when he began deconstructing heroes. A slew of writers have tried to emulate Alan Moore's deconstruction, with subverting expectations becoming a buzzword to mean the creator is going to fundamentally change what you expect or know of a character. And Miracleman is another deconstruction. Well made, yes, but another deconstruction. And believe me, I get it. As a Christian, I get the irony of my love for Miracleman's run. Alan Moore clearly took inspiration for the Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche, which is a story against Christianity and religion as a whole and focuses on worship of man. And you get that theme as the story of Miracleman unfolds. And while I cling to the Bible as pure truth, I appreciate the prose of Miracleman that reads more like classic literature than a comic book, which really follows Alan Moore's flowery style. And I honestly am jealous, as I wish I could sometimes write with such a flourish. Alan Moore's deconstruction starts with Miracleman's origin. Miracleman began as Marvelman back in the 1950s as a blatant ripoff of Captain Marvel, but with British origins. Mike Moran turns into Marvelman by saying Komoda, which is atomic spelled backwards, and he is joined by his two sidekicks, Johnny Bates as Kid Marvelman and Dickie Dauntless as Young Marvelman, to form the Marvelman family. Both turn into their alter egos by saying Marvelman's name out loud. I mean, they really leaned into the Captain Marvel ripoff. Marvelman ran to the early 60s, where Alan Moore read the comic book as a child, which was a basic superhero run with folksy, goofy heroes saying things like gee whiz and golly as they fought generic reoccurring villains like Gargunza and defeating them with a nice neat bow at the end. 20 years later, Alan Moore turned that origin on his head, asking the question of what if the superheroes were real and everything he read as a kid was just a simulation they were forced to endure. Moore goes on to pull on these threads of the origin, weaving a realistic tale. To avoid copyright issues, the comic was now called Miracleman and explored Mike Moran, the human side of Miracleman. A married man, Mike Moran was chubby, middle-aged, and working a menial job as a reporter, and having no clue of the power he had inside, except for a recurring dream about three miraculous heroes and an explosion that seemingly killed them. Except it didn't. While covering a robbery, once Mike Moran saw the word atomic in a mirror, he said the word that changed him back into Miracleman after decades. And this is where the deconstruction truly begins, as the story goes Alan Moore dark, as we learn why Miracleman was forced to act out those silly storylines and why he was gone for so long. Moore weaves a fairly complicated story. Typical Alan Moore, right? The Miraclemen were part of a government experiment after they discovered the remains of a fallen alien ship. Reverse engineering some of the technology, brilliant and psychotic scientist Emil Gargunza, one of the enemies from the dream, creates the Miracleman Project, where they kidnap people and create super beings. The dreams were made to train and control the beings who just became too powerful. The recurring explosion dream that Mike Moran kept having was the government's attempt to kill the creations. Lured into space in real life, the Miracleman family members were caught in an atomic explosion. Young Miracleman was killed on the spot, while the Force reverted Miracleman back to Mike Moran and wiped his memory. And Moore's twist on the tale was that Kid Miracleman actually survived and had grown up in the real world as Johnny Bates, and became a rags to riches success. And one of the best things that happened in the entire run occurs in issue 2 when Mike Moran meets with a grown-up Johnny Bates who explains how he barely survived the explosion but lost his power in the process. Yet this too was a lie. Moore brilliantly composes the truth that Johnny did indeed keep his power and grew up as Kid Marvelman. Powerful and unopposed in all the world, Johnny's soul was corrupted by being the overman of the earth, the Ubermans mentioned in Nietzsche's work. And honestly, Kid Marvelman is one of the most frightening villains in comic book history, but rarely gets mentioned anymore because Alan Moore doesn't actually linger on him past 2 issues, only showing him here and there until the iconic issue 15. What's cool about this reveal is the thought that Alan Moore put into the circumstances. With Miracleman dormant for decades, and Kid Marvelman staying in his powerful form for decades, that changed the balance of power. Kid Miracleman had years to experiment and perfect his power as Miracleman remained static. The battle wasn't even close as Kid Miracleman pummels his former mentor, who only survives because Kid Miracleman got caught up in his hubris and accidentally said his code word out loud that reverted him back to his Kid Bates self. But the battle alerted the government that Miracleman survived, and the rest of the issues are Mike Moran exploring his powers and the Zarathustra organization that created him. And Alan Moore takes his time to dive deep into the alien and metaphysical philosophy. Like any Alan Moore comic, the pace really slows, but it's written in such a brilliant way that it keeps you engaged. As you can expect, the story really gets twisted from there on. Gargunza, who created the Miracleman, is truly a psychopath on the level of a Joseph Mengele. The Miracleman family were not his only experiments, as others failed and others went mad, such as young nasty man who went insane from the power. And there was another hidden female member of the Miracleman family called Miracle Woman, who Gargunza had kidnapped and one that he repeatedly raped while she slept during the simulations to satisfy his sadistic fantasies. But Gargunza was truly brilliant, figuring out that when the code word was said, Mike Moran and the Miracles didn't transform into their alter egos, but changed the space with them. In a sense, Mike's body was switched with that of a more powerful Miracleman's. Although they shared a mind, Miracleman was a better version of Mike. He was smarter, stronger, poetic, and clear-minded. Gargunza's hope was to have the Miracles create a child so he can transfer his consciousness into the child's body and live forever with a powerful new form. Again, Alan Moore went quickly through the storyline, keeping the lore rollout going as Miracleman wasn't actually transforming into a hero, but slowly falling into the same trap Kid Miracleman did by being the most powerful being on Earth. Miracleman's hubris was only buoyed from the aliens from who Gargunza received their technology came to retrieve their ship, only to be surprised that humans were actually able to tap into the technology to create the miracles. And this opened the whole universe in the Miracleman family. And the aliens were on the cusp of bequeathing Earth's sector to Miracleman and Miracle Woman as they joined the Interstellar Federation until the disturbance back on Earth gained their attention. And again, Alan Moore does a brilliant job of building back up to the return of Kid Miracleman in the now iconic Miracleman number 15, which I do have a copy of. With amazing art from John Tuttleben that captured the kinetic action, it's one of the bloodiest and brutal comics in comic book history. While Miracleman was exploring his past, Kid Miracleman was torturing Johnny Bates' mind, trying to goad him into saying the code word again. Johnny valiantly resisted, but with no ID or family, he was put into a boys' home. It was there that he was bullied, and he was nearly sodomized by one of the boys, which then forced him to release Kid Miracleman. I said released, but I should say unleashed, as Kid Miracleman turned London into an absolute horror show. Part revenge and just part of his sadism, Kid Miracleman turns the city into a murderous playground. In just this one issue, Alan Moore resolves the conflict, but it shows a deterioration in Kid Miracleman's mind. His suit turns black as his heart and mind, just like young Nasty Man, as the battle unfolds between Kid Miracleman against the Miracles and a couple of aliens called the Warpsmith who came to their aid. And what was awesome that it wasn't even Miracleman who ended the battle. It was the Warpsmiths who found the way to finally kill the Miracle. And I know I really left out a lot, and I'm purposely being vague so people can actually go out and read this comic. But I have to admit and warn that there was a problem with the run. EC Comics had a flood right in the middle of Alan Moore's run, which led to a lame fill-in issues and a change to some really mediocre art as Alan Moore had to adjust to the new schedule. And this really was a shame because these are some really important issues to the lore that kind of muddy the run a bit, but Alan Moore recovers in the latter issues before Neil Gaiman took over. But Alan Moore really created a unique story at the time that secretly told the story of a superhuman believing he knew what was best for the world and took over the world to make it in his image. It really was Thus Spoke Zarathustra in comic book form. And again, I'm a Christian who believes that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, so the whole philosophy thing doesn't ring true to me, but I appreciate as a writer that it makes for a compelling story. And Alan Moore tells it with such grace and skill that I truly am jealous because I wish I could write like him even sometimes. For example, even this scene where Miracleman is telling the story through dance, it's just amazing to me that you can see their happiness on the aliens as it begins and the sorrow as he gets to the part of Kid Miracleman's return. Alan Moore is just a genius of weaving this underlying stories within stories. Just great stuff to me. So go read Miracleman. It used to be hard to find the entire story, but now it's in graphic novels and omnibus form, and it's worth every penny. Even Neil Gaiman's run that takes the story further. And I wanted to remind you about my website, themegacosm.com. Here you can keep up with the latest information about the Megacosm, as well as read short stories for free. As an added bonus, I have the first chapters of my novels for free as well, just so you can read a sample and decide later if you want to buy the novel. I also have links to the articles I write for Bleeding Fool, and I have recently launched a Megacosm merch store with t-shirts that feature the Fiasco logo, as well as my publishing imprint. And I also have baby onesies because, well, they just look cool cosplaying as Fiasco. But God bless you and keep you. That's it, I'm done.